Thou hast seen nothing yet. The day's events, our last moments in this land of constant contrast, have proven a heavy burden while waiting to be written. I left the last letter to you unfinished yesterday because the African dawn beckoned once again and I could not resist. Last evening before we went into dinner, Muffin brought forth Believe cards from her bag of tricks. Each member of our group selected one, and then we went around the room, with each reading his or her card aloud. The outside of each said simply, I believe, and inside was a saying, be it a famous quote or a Chinese proverb, kind of a cross between an affirmation and a fortune cookie. Mine said, Thou hast seen nothing yet. With all I had seen and felt and heard and touched and smelled, I found it hard to believe that any new thing could top the last, and yet, time and again, it had. So this card opened up the possibilities of what was still to come. This sunrise comes on our last day on the Mara. This sunrise comes after the day I had bettered my final demon. This sunrise is like no other I have seen. First light teases me through the open tent flaps and then summons me with an array of deep magentas, violets, and hot orange reds. I abandon my pen and step out into the morning as the world rises around me in every glorious color of the spectrum. This is a significant sunrise, one that reminds me that it is our last. Still, my love, I search for the answer, the reason for my being here to witness each moment that has unfolded seemingly just for me. It is hard to believe that in just a few hours I will board that luxury jet and leave all of this behind. And that is why I stand here this morning, inhaling my final sunrise through every sense available. It seeps in my pores and runs through my veins, hot as blood. I will take this sunrise with me, not on a tiny chip, but in my soul. It will now be a part of me, and it will fill me up when I am empty. I rejoice in this day. As I stand here absorbing what lies ahead, I am immersed in the memory of last afternoon and the last game drive of our safari. It was a quiet drive through seemingly deserted space. Karen remarked that it was odd that there were no zebra or impala or Cape buffalo, or at least wildebeest, but for the first hour on the Mara, the only sight or sound was of birds. Out of the corner of his eye, Bwana catches me once again touching Mom's magic earrings, and then, there they are, 2 cheetahs, possibly brothers, taking turns feasting on a topi baby. Their faces are crimson from the spill of the kill, and we watch, once again mesmerized as the setting sun strikes the gloss of their golden coats. We don't linger long, but this is our last look, and will remain with us as the success and the lack and the astounding beauty of our last game drive. Donnie had been given his gift the evening before, when we'd driven to the far end of the boundary to witness the only 3 rhinos in the park. A crash, as they call it, with father, mother, and baby. We had seen a lone rhino back at the crater, and as with the cheetah sighting there, it had been so far away that Donnie was dissatisfied. I was glad he got to see this great beast close up, for they are few in the wild and their numbers diminish daily. On the same drive, only moments before, we had stumbled on 2 cheetah brothers sleeping under the shade of a tree. So I imagined this sunrise to be my final gift, and that is why I opt out of the early morning game drive on our last day. Later, I'll hear that on the morning drive I passed up, a male adult lion had performed for Harry's camera, some 3,000 pictures he's taken this trip. The starter went out twice, and I patted myself on the back that I had had the sense to hang back at camp. My thoughts wander to the day before, after the balloon ride, when we encounter a hippo carcass, literally alive with carrion. Then we stumble upon lions lurking on the edge of the bush. I begin to feel that some of our group are getting a little too bold and blasé when they climb out of the vehicle to scout the water's edge and view the hippos wallowing in what little mud still remains in the river. Across the bank, 3 crocodiles sit lazing in the sun. There is another safari group that have taken their lunches out of their vehicle and are preparing a picnic on the banks of the river with the lions skulking in the bush less than 100 yards away. From where we are situated, Karen spots a huge hippo out of the water baking in the morning sun to our left, placing us in line with his intended destination, the river, where his relatives cool their huge, bloated bodies. As soon as Karen alerts David to the hippo, he yells at Paul and Jack to get back in the vehicle. They obey, but slowly, and David is noticeably nervous. Beyond our people are the others unwrapping their lunches. Once our guys are back in the car, we drive far out and around the hippo and double back. Safely on the other side of him, David points out the path that the great beast is following. It takes him to the river and directly in line with where we had been sitting. This is the most dangerous of all animals here, even more than the cats, and an involuntary shudder creeps through me. Despite their size and slow appearance, hippos are incredibly fast and will kill anything in their path without hesitation. His massive head is hung low to the ground, his huge lips touching the earth. His relatively small eyes peer at us, but he makes no threatening moves. He is sick, David tells us. He is about to die. And as that is said, he begins a slow, lumbering, tedious walk down his pathway toward the river. I am reminded that all the animals are dying here, as they are in Samburu and Arusha and Ngorongoro crater. I can feel their thirst. And even this huge, ugly creature draws a tear from me when we hear later, back in camp, that indeed he has died. The group having lunch had watched as he slowly approached the river on his death march, each step more faltering than the last. Just as he hit the incline at the riverbank, he fell, and there he died. My thoughts wandered to the little zebra baby we'd seen the day before with the broken leg. Although its certain fate seemed heartless, we understood the mother had to survive, and that trying to protect her young would endanger her. She was unlike the Topi mom, whose baby the cheetah had taken that last day. She stood those few yards away from the scene of the cats feasting on her child in mourning. She did not join the herd, which in turn gave her no solace. She was on her own, and I asked David what will happen to her. She will forget in a day or two and rejoin the herd, he said. She would mate and give birth, and perhaps the new baby would survive the cats and the hyenas and the drought. I am reminded that the circle of life is equal parts circle of death. The spectacle of the feasting cheetah is but a few yards away from a mourning mother. And so we ready to leave and take our third trip on the tiny, single-engine, single-pilot bush plane to Nairobi. It is almost old hat for me now, and I have only minimal pangs of fear as I board. The flights had been good, but as it turns out, this is our bumpiest ride of the trip. The tiny plane slips and slides on invisible black ice on the imaginary pavement of sky. We finally land smack dab in the middle of civilization, which we haven't seen since we left Arusha nearly a week ago. Throngs of black hands reaching for handouts from the American tourists close in on me. I am unsettled as we pile into the minivan and I claim the front seat. I was relieved to see a familiar face in our driver, Joseph, who has taken us from the border town to Finch Hattons last week. Our driver in Tanzania had been a menace driving through the city, but I'd found Joseph to be much more reserved, so I can marvel at the number of people along the highway, walking and crossing the street in front of the vehicles beating down on them.